So you know today's potluck. So I thought what I would do is tell you guys today, since this is all about food today, of some superstitions about food around the world. This is at Christmas time. So one of them is, if you do not eat plum pudding during the season, you will have bad luck. You ever eat plum pudding? That's the bad luck.
There's even that plum pudding.
And if you refuse mincemeat pie at Christmas dinner, you will have bad luck all year. A loaf of bread left on the table after Christmas dinner will ensure no lack of bread for the next year. If an apple is eaten at midnight on Christmas Eve, good luck will follow you all year. And my personal favorite, at midnight on Christmas Eve, all water turns to wine.
Good thing it doesn't.
These are different superstitions around the world. And then there's another thing about food and potlucks and churches I thought I'd share with you. These are some arguments people have in churches. Not this one, not this one. I wouldn't be joking about it if it was this one. But one is an argument about whether to have gluten-free bread for communion in those tiny little wafers. They argued about it for months, it said. One church member was chastised because she brought vanilla syrup to the coffee server. They didn't want it there because it looked too much like liquor. And there was the church that fought for months and had disagreements over whether to change the term potluck to the term pot blessing. That one almost split the church in half. So we can thank our lucky stars, can't we? That we don't have that kind of thing around here. But anyway, I thought I'd give you a little humor about Christmas and potluck.
That potluck would go in several different directions.
So there are a few of you here today that weren't here last week, so I'm going to give you just a little bit of a review. You know, we talked last week about the metaphysical meaning of Christmas and the prophecy of the birth of a Messiah who would come to save the Jewish people. This prophecy was written in the book of Isaiah 700 years before Jesus was born, and it's found in the Old Testament. It says that this king, this Messiah, would be born to save the Israelites from the darkness of death and suffering. Listen to the words, that he would come to save them from the darkness of death and suffering, and from the pain of bondage of the Assyrian Empire, which was their cruel captors. Now, the writer of this prophecy was Isaiah, and he was considered to be a major prophet, and all the prophets were considered to be men who were able to have direct conversations with God and bring the message back to the people. What we read from last week was chapter 9 in the book of Isaiah, and the beginning of that prophecy said, "The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelled in the land of deep darkness, on them light has shined." So this morning is going to be about the metaphysics of the word light. Light is and always has been a symbol of wisdom. And in that prophecy, it also says that for unto us a child is born, a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, And his name will be Wonderful Counselor. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. Counselor is also a symbol of wisdom. So we have in that prophecy two symbols that will be a descriptor of Jesus and his teachings. One is light, and we hear in that prophecy about it dispels the darkness, or will dispel the darkness. And the word counselor, which is also a symbol for wisdom. And the light is also our inner light, which is the illumination of the Spirit within us that lives in the center of every man's being. So we get that prophecy 700 years before Jesus died with language that is still used today, and it was still used in the New Testament. And the language is a metaphor for the word light being intelligence, wisdom, and a word for God. Remember back in the Old Testament, you couldn't utter a word, a name for God. It was not allowed. So they used all kind of metaphors to describe God. And God was not even called God until the 13th century. But they used words to describe God, like light and wisdom and truth and peace, because they couldn't use a name for God at that time. And then, of course, all of those attributes were passed on to Jesus as the God incarnate, because all of those words were descriptors of God. So if we fast forward to the story of the birth that we're celebrating this month, we see those same words used over and over again. And I'm going to give you some places where you will hear this very same scripture and the words repeated. Here's a passage that comes from the book of Luke in the New Testament, and it says, "In the field where the shepherds were, the light of God shone all around them when the angel came to tell them of the good news of the birth of the Messiah, the one that would set them free from darkness, pain, and bondage." We see this once again as a reference to wisdom and light dispelling the darkness. And in this story in Luke, we're told about the wise men who followed the very light, which was the star, the very light of God, the very wisdom of God. So the metaphysics of that is that they followed the light, the God light, but they followed that, and it was very wise, and they were the wisest of men to do that. Jesus said later when he was an adult, "I am the light of the world." And in Matthew 5:14, in his Sermon on the Mount to the people, we have to remember, he said, "You are the light of the world." He said this, "Men do not light a light." Let me start over. "Men do not light a lamp and put it under a bushel basket, but puts it on a stand where it gives light to all the house." In the same verse of his talk of the Sermon on the Mount, he says, "Let your light shine before men, that they may see your good works." We're not just here to hear about good works. We're here to do the good works. "Greater things than he will we do," he said. This Christmas season celebrates the story of the birth of a baby named Jesus, who grew to be a man and lived his life according to the light and the wisdom of God. We know that the word God is synonymous with the word love. It was one of the ways, before there was a name called God, it was one of the ways that God was described as love. And we still do today. We know that there's no greater love than the love of God. So the message to us is this. If you want to take the metaphysics of it and look at it, Jesus lived his life according to the wisdom of love. Doesn't that sound great? Which is what he did. He lived his life according to the wisdom of love. In every act that he modeled for us, he was showing love. That's what he meant when he said to us, follow me. Do as I do. I'm showing you what to do and how to do it. Live from love. Be wise and live from love. And remember, back in the Isaiah scripture, it said that the Messiah would save the Hebrews from darkness, pain, and bondage. So what's the metaphysical message to us? The metaphysics of that statement to you and me is, I'm teaching you how to be wise and loving. It will set you free. You will no longer live in darkness or bondage to your own human suffering. Jesus showed us how to live fully as he did from his love and his wisdom. And again, I'll repeat, he said, these works I do, greater works than these will you do. He was always teaching us by example how to live our lives, never forgetting. If you go back and you study his words, he never forgot to remind us of our power and that we have to use it. The story of the birth of Jesus is the story of the birth of light and wisdom in you and me, and we get to birth it over and over again. It's who we were created to be. If you wonder why there's magic in Christmas year after year after year after year, never goes away. Christmas is celebrated all around the world every year. It's not going away either, I don't believe.
Yeah.
But the magic of Christmas every year is that we have an opportunity in this month of Christmas to be reminded again and again that this is a season of love. It's when we go to church. I think people want to get reconnected with God. You know, they say that more people go to church on Christmas than any other time of the year. We want to be reminded. We want to have that feeling again and again. And we look at this frequently here at Unity, but the very words of Jesus tell us that the mission of his ministry was to awaken in us all the truth that each and every one of us has the light of the Christ within us. And I want to remind you, remember, Christ was a title that they gave to Jesus, a Latin word, Christos, that they gave to Jesus because he embodied truth and love and peace and joy. All of the things that they used to describe, used words to describe for God when they couldn't say a title or a word for God. So to awaken in us all the truth that every one of us has that same light of Christ in us, waiting to be born, waiting to come forth and dispel the darkness in our own lives. And we have an obligation to dispel the darkness in our world. Awaken is to enlighten. And that's what we're here to do. This is why Christmas lives on year after year. It's why we celebrate it. It's why we make extra plans to be with those we love, to go to the church of our choice, to be reminded that this story, the story of the birth of the Christ, is in us all, and that it celebrates the birth of a baby named Jesus, who lived from that light and that love and that wisdom, predicted long before he was born. And I know that I've said light a lot of times this morning, but that's really what it's about. And this ancient verse that was brought to our attention by Isaiah 700 years earlier reminds us again that light has always been known and used as the metaphor for wisdom, intelligence, and even God. You know, when you walk in a room and you switch on the light, thank you, God. I like those little emphases that we get put on my talk.
Special effects.
Wow. Okay. When you walk in a room and you switch on the light dispels the darkness. You know that. You can't stay in the darkness once you flip the light on, if it's working. Light makes the way safe. When we walk out on a dark path, we take the lantern or the candle or the flashlight to show our way, so we're safe in the dark. In the book of John in the New Testament, Jesus was called the light of the world because of the wisdom of his teachings. If we fast forward to that important night of his birth, we hear it again and again. A man who would grow into great wisdom and truth. And, you know, each one of the Gospels is a little bit different than the other one. They have a little bit of a different story, because they were written at different times in history, hundreds of years after Jesus died. One of them, I think, was written 70 years after Jesus died. But they all say the same thing. It's really interesting. In another place, in the book of Luke, in the New Testament, it says, in the field where the shepherds were, the light of God shone all around them. When the angel came to tell them of the good news of the birth of the Christ child, light was all around them. And in the book of Matthew, it says about the birth, wise men from the east followed the star until it came to rest over the place where the child was born. East is where the sun rises. It's where the light first comes. So that's a very interesting metaphor. Wise men from the east followed the star until it came to rest over the place where the child was born. In ancient times, I think we may have talked about this before, stars were thought to be the light of God shining through the holes in the roof of the world. Ancient people thought the world had a roof over it, just like their homes had a floor and a roof, and that they were in this like big, large room. And remember, they never went very far away from where they lived, because they were they walked or on a donkey, and so they usually never went more than about 15 miles from where they lived. So they really didn't understand the space have the book of John. The book of John is a metaphysical book of the Bible. Everything about the book of John is metaphysical, not literal. And he says, in him was life, and life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. We have a broader vocabulary now. And as I was writing this, I was thinking about, today we call light energy. Light is energy. We know that now. They didn't have that word then. But all we are is energy. And John said in the book of John, our life is energy. When we die, the energy is gone. That's why we die. He said the life was the light of men. Isn't that interesting? Our energy can be love and wisdom, or it can be pain and suffering, guys. We get to choose. We get to choose what the life looks like in us. But we do know that life requires light to survive. When we look at the very words of Jesus, we can see that the mission of his ministry was to awaken all people. He wanted us to all be wiser, kinder, more truthful, more caring. The whole idea of his ministry was to bring the light of wisdom to us, wanting it to come forth and dispel the darkness in our own lives. I can't be of service to you if I'm in a dark place. So the mission is, even for us today, as he said, to bring the light of love and the light of peace into the world, into our world and into the world. So when we celebrate Christmas, that's really what we're celebrating over and over again. And I think it's what we're feeling. We have this Christmas spirit. We're feeling the love and the light and the energy that somehow or other at this time of year we all have. And the birth story is that we have to remember that we can born it in ourselves. We can birth it in ourselves again and again and again. We do it in celebration each year. We can do it every day in our lives. Who was it that said we get do-overs? We get a do-over. Isn't that a good thing? I think it's a good thing. I'm glad I get a do-over. So it will change your relationships. It will change your interactions. It will change your world and the world around you. And that's another reason that we celebrate. Jesus came to show us the way, to dispel the darkness and our darkness. And he came to show us how to do it and what's possible. The Christmas story is that mystical journey to the place within ourselves where we can find our full humanity and our full divinity. John called it the mystery hidden through the ages. He called it the journey from our head to our heart. It has remained a powerful story and a powerful celebration for how many thousands of years? Because at the archetypical level of our consciousness, we know what it's about. each year, it's a great reminder. James Dillett Freeman, who was the poet laureate of Unity, wrote a poem titled, "My Prayer for You This Christmas." And in it, he includes these words of blessing. May you have the compassion that Mary had, and the understanding that Joseph had, and may the blessing of the Christ child be yours, not because of his birth long ago, but because his love is born in you today. And in the 17th century, Angelus Silesius said, "Though Christ 1,000 times in Bethlehem be born, if he is not born in thee, thy soul is still forlorn."